part 2. Just watched a bit of that vid back, and sorry about the sound, it's not as good as my mobile phone. I'm using my tablet on this, but it'll have to do. I'll just maybe try and talk a bit louder, talking loudly. Okay, so I kind of did like 74 to 84 there. So in 1986, Priest released a very, very controversial album, Turbo. There was actually 2 reviews of this album in Kerrang. I think they did a review and gave it 5 stars. And one of the critics was so apoplectic about it, later on he re-reviewed it and gave it 1 star, well 1K. So I'll just show you this. It came with a lyric sheet. What's there? Not an inner sleeve. Obviously the record company's being cheapskates. Yeah, you can see the artwork. It's the same artist. It's just kind of, it's a lady's hand. It's in the hair metal era, this. And what I would argue, this is Priest's attempt at making a hair metal album. So it's got like kind of more party lyrics and stuff. Other fact about this is the first heavy metal album recorded digitally. So everyone records digitally now. It must have been a long process. Using drum machine again. However, the drum machine sound on this works really well for the album because it's technological in its sound. Yeah, so let's get the top stuff out of the way. It begins and ends with 2 phenomenal tracks. It starts with Turbo Lover, which they still play live. You'll hear that on Planet Rock quite a lot. It's a great track. The production's great. The way it builds, it's just brilliant, I think. And it finishes side 2 of a track called Reckless, which was going to be used on the Top Gun soundtrack, but in the end wasn't selected. It's a shame because it would have done a lot for Priest. But it's a great song. It's really euphoric. The rhythm guitar sound, the harness on this, if you listen to the opening riff, I think it's the best rhythm guitar sound they ever got. And it's got a great Glenn Tipton solo. The rest of the album, so going back to side 1, Locked In and Private Property, tracks 2 and 3, they're really cool. Then you've probably got 2 tracks that have quite, immature lyrics. There's Parental Guidance, which is all about, not, being told what to do by your mum and dad. And then there's Rock You All Around the World, which I loved as a kid, and I still sort of do. Rock You All Around the World's got a great solo in it. And then you've got Out in the Cold, opening side 2, which is a good, sophisticated sort of ballad. And then 2 real party metal tracks. There's Wild Nights and Hot and Crazy Days, Hot for Love. And, I like the tracks, but I can understand why people didn't like this album. It's of its time. I think it's aged pretty well. The production, what they're trying to go for, does sound pretty cool. It was a very successful album. They did a big tour in the States. It went platinum. But I think it did turn off a lot of sort of diehard fans. So there was that element to it, and that'll inform what they do later. But I've always, when I got this, I think it was at school. I think my brother got it for me from the record shop, and it got straight in, and I recorded it. I taped it on cassette. Then we had a tape player with batteries in, which we had in the back of the car. Well, I was in the back of the car because I was going to see Dokken and at the Manchester Apollo that night. So I remember we played this in the car going down. So I had the second and third player, something going to Manchester. So it was a great metal day, new Judas Priest album, singing my favourite guitarists of all time, and then also realising Accept were awesome. So, I've never had as big a beef. I do really like this album, and I'll still listen to it a lot. They did a live album on that tour. Strange, sort of unusual cover. I guess maybe the record company just decided to put this out. I'll show you the inside. I mean, that's the stage set, proper metal robot. But it's got all these, kind of computer hands. So the track listing on this, obviously, it's quite weighted towards Turbo, and then tracks from since the British Steel album. So it's really good. The band plays really well. It's just not, it's not Unleashed in the East. I can't remember when I got that. It's not an album I listen to much. Next up is this one. Can't remember where I got this. I remember the review in Kerrang. Saying it was kind of getting back to kind of more metal. 1988's Rowing Down, again, sort of controversial album. So basically, Priest, after, the critical perception of the Turbo, they sort of try and make an album more metal. But in actual fact, a lot of the production elements of Turbo you can find on this album. It uses a drum machine. It's got a kind of heavily chorus guitar sound. Again, it's got some quite sort of daft lyrics. So you got Ram It Down, the title track. That's really good. That opens up the album. That's got an amazing KK and Glenn trade-off solo where they just go for it. Then you got Heavy Metal second, which, yeah, it's called Heavy Metal. It's pretty cool. Love Zone, kind of sleazy, groovy rocker, quite like it. Track called Come and Get It, cliche title, phenomenal Halford vocal on this. And then side one ends with a really classic Priest deep cut for me, Hard as Iron. Really good track, great solo, just totally euphoric chorus, really like it. And then it opens side two with another cult classic, Blood Red Skies. Really good sci-fi lyric on this, very sort of Terminator influenced, and Halford's in great form. Then there's I'm a Rocker, which not a great title, but they played that live quite a lot, still doing it. It's a really good track. Then there's their controversial cover of Johnny B. Good. I like it. I understand if people don't. It's just one of those things. I had the single when I was a kid, so when it comes on, I've always felt I have to dislike it on principle, but I don't. I like it. Then you got Love You to Death, sort of a sleazy metal track. It's alright. Then it finishes a really drab track called Monsters of Rock, which is my least favourite, or one of my least favourite Priest tracks. This album came with in a sleeve, lyrics. So didn't do as well as Turbo this and Priest. Like a lot of bands at the end of the 80s have been around a while. They're competing with the twin forces of the newer sort of hair metal bands who are doing well, like your Rats and Motley Crue and stuff like that. And then the alternative rock scene's just starting to bubble under. You're going to get bands like Jane's Addiction, Faith No More making albums, and that's going to start sort of turning people's heads in a different direction. So the next album is the last Priest album I have on vinyl. I'll show you the CDs quickly after this. 1990s Painkiller. They are mental album cover. I should say that this artwork's done by Mark Wilkinson. He did the previous album cover, and he's done all the artwork for Judas Priest since 1988. At the time, I'll just show you, this came in a sleeve as well. There's the band dressed in leather looking metal. At the time, I wasn't as keen on this album because I felt Priest was sort of gone a bit thrashy. Basically, the thrash scene had become the sort of go-to thing for authentic metal, I guess. So it's a really heavy album. It's not got as much light and shade in it. It's full on. But they get Scott Travis from Racer X into the band, and he gives a brilliant drum performance. So on the opening track, Painkiller, he does an amazing drum intro that's a real kind of gold standard metal drum intro. Production's called by the late Chris Sangarides. He engineered them on the Sad Wings album, and he does a great job on this. He actually, on the drum sound, I don't know if it's all the tracks, or certainly on the track Painkiller, he actually uses some white noise within the snare sound, which is really interesting. So it's very, very heavy. Painkiller, Hell Patrol, All Guns Blazing, Leather Rebel, Metal Meltdown, that's side one. The first three tracks were really, really good. I actually prefer side two of this album. You've got Nightcrawler, Between the Hammer and the Anvil, which are cool mid-tempo tracks. Then A Touch of Evil, which is sort of the album's single, or one of them. It's got a little more commercial element, but it's really heavy, co-written with Chris Sangarides. There's a little instrumental, and then it goes into a favourite deep cut of mine by Priest called One Shot of Glory, so it's a really good finishing track on the album. So it's a classic album. I mean, it's a classic comeback album. It's a big influence on power metal, so as the 1990s goes on, the European metal scene in Germany and countries like that, they will take the elements of thrash that Priest did for this album, so I'll have more, down picking on the riffs and be heavier. So I'll have that element, but I'll have the elements of melody that Priest bring, and also a lot of vocal harmonies. So again, like Priest, they were a bit ahead of the time. The album did well, but by that point, it was clear, like metal, I didn't realise at the time that people were going to move into, they were going to start listening to grunge and the alternative rock scene and stuff like that. So, it probably didn't, although it did well for them, it probably would have, might have done better earlier. Maybe if they'd done it in '88, I don't know. But classic metal album. I bought that in Windows. That was my first Newcastle-based Windows record shop-based purchase of The Priest. So after that, Rob Halford leaves and Priest don't make an album for 7 years. That's dramatic, isn't it? Just picking these CDs over. So then they do Jugulator, which is their first album with Tim Ripper Owens on vocals. Got this album at the time. It's difficult. It doesn't sound like Priest as much. Not just because of Ripper's singing. He's really good. He's great, by the way. But they're going for like a really heavy sound. There's a lot of down-tuned guitars. You can hear they've been listening to Pantera, Machine Head, bands like that. There is some good tracks on it that I like. Bloodstained, Burning Hell, Abductors, Bullet Train. Bullet Train's my favourite. That's a great track. I mean, that's the kind of track they could do with Halford now. I mean, it'd be great. But it's obviously Rob not being there, it just doesn't have that classic sound. And then they do this album, which is controversial with Ripper, called Demolition. Now, generally speaking, people prefer Jugulator, but I actually prefer this album. It's got more tracks on. There's a little more diversity on this and a bit more melody. And there's some tracks I really like on this. A track called Feed on Me, Bloodsuckers, Subterfuge, that's a good track. A couple of ballads, Close to You, Lost and Found, which are good. One on One. But a lot of people just get a bad rap. The albums didn't do, I think Jugulator sold 500,000 worldwide. This sold about 250,000. So, it's that difficult time in the 90s where bands are trying to navigate that. Iron Maiden, other bands, Sabbath, Dio, all the sales went down, basically, because first people got into grunge, the Seattle scene, although I don't really like that term because it's unfair on the bands. And then about 94, 95, you get bands like Korn and what's called new metal coming in. So the 1990s is really taken up with the Seattle scene and harder elements of metal, and then to the new metal scene. Although Pantera and Megadeth and Metallica did well in the 90s, Dream Theater did pretty well as well. So basically Rob Halford comes back and then they make Angel of Retribution, which I think is a really strong comeback record. Absolutely obsessed with it at the time, just having Priest back in the world. Judas Rising opens it, good track. Deal with the Devil, awesome. Revolution, worth fighting for. Track 5, Demonizer, great track that. Then you got, I always look at albums and pretend it's vinyl. It's like side 2 opens with Wheels of Fire, that's track 6. But if it was vinyl, it would. That's a kind of underrated track on the album, actually. It's just one of those little tracks that's really good. Then you got the ballad Angel, which is nice. Hellrider, really epic. Great guitar intro by K.K. Downing on that. Then it finishes, it's got a track of Eulogy, which is just a little sort of 2-minute piece. Then it finishes controversially with a track Long Ness. It's about 13 minutes long. I'll not go into it. It's got some really good riffing, there's some really good music in it. I just don't think the lyrics work for a Metal Monster song. Then, more Priest controversy. At this point, the management suggests making a concept album. So they do the double album based on the prophecies and the life of Nostradamus. So again, this gets a bad rap. I think there's a perception it didn't sell well, but it did. It sold probably as well as Angel Retribution, or not far off. I mean, this is in a period when bands are experiencing decreasing sales, basically because of Napster, then iTunes, people doing illegal downloading, not buying physical, and so on. Obviously, we moved to kind of streaming model now, and that can be good for bands getting exposure, but not as good for the income that can earn, although it's getting better. So I really loved this album at the time. I still really like it. I'm a kind of guy who gets really obsessed with like any Priest album just because it's new Priest music. I think it's too long. You got a double CD, they're both 45 minutes long. This could have fitted on one CD and been kind of 75 minutes. It's mid-tempo to slow tempo, and it uses a lot of synthesizer orchestral samples, which are good quality. I think it would be better if it had a proper orchestra on it. Halford sounds great. There's some really good guitar solos. Production could be better. But it opens up with some cool little instrumental, Dawn of Creation, which I love. And then it goes into Prophecy. Then it's got a little instrumental and the track Revelations. I love those songs. Next track I'm less into, which is the Four Horsemen. Then it goes into one called War. Then you've got a track called Sands of Time, a little instrumental, and then Pestilence and Plague, which is interesting because Halford sings in Latin on the chorus, which is really unique. Then you've got the track Death, which is a slow Sabbath number. It's just pretty cool. They played that one live on the tour, along with the track Prophecy. I should say at this point there was talk that Priest would perform all this live and put on like a kind of production. It just never happened. They only played 2 tracks of it live. I saw them on this tour and it was the best day I ever saw them. The set list was great. I went to something called the Priest Feast. It was Megadeth and Testament, and they did a great set list. So even though people were knocking this album, I weren't sure what to make of it. They did a really cool tour. Next I got a track called Conquest, which I love, really good. Then you got Lost Love, that's a ballad, I'm not into that. And then Persecution, which is probably the fastest track off the album. Again, I really like it. Side 2 opens with a track which I think is the best on the album, and I put it up there with some of the best Priest tracks ever. It's a song called Exiled. It's really epic. It's got a great Halford vocal. You got Alone, another great track, not the hard song. Visions, quite a catchy little track. Song called New Beginnings, I don't like that one. Then the title track Nostradamus, I like this. It's a kind of faster, heavier track with some cool soloing. Then it finishes with Future of Mankind. And at the end of that, Halford does a kind of voiceover in French and it sounds really good. So it's one of those albums you've got to kind of sit with it. You can't sort of just if you just put it on and go, oh, you know, you've got to be kind of committed to Priest and giving it a listen. It needs to sort of go, yeah, I know I like this or I don't like it. So I like it. I think, you know, at the time when they made this, obviously you got bands like Nightwish and things like that. So I think there's a little bit of influence there using the symphonic element. Yeah, so that's like Nostradamus. Next up, basically